Good morning, good afternoon, and happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, depending on whatever the time zone you are joining us from, to look at emotional intelligence as a Vista leader. So my name is Kapila Vavegama. I have had the opportunity to meet some of you at your leaders orientation, and also I see some of the new leaders who have joined us over the last few weeks who will be coming to their orientation in April. So welcome everybody. So first of all, before I go any further, let me quickly see whether you can hear me clearly. So if a couple of you can let me know through the chat function whether you can hear me clearly, that would be a great feedback. Cool, thank you. All right. So with that, let's get started. So our theme for this conversation is emotional intelligence in leadership. Not just looking at emotional intelligence, but also looking at it as a competency, but in relation to being a leader. So today we have three opportunities. I like to call them opportunities because that's all we have, right? So making the best out of these opportunities are up to all of us, you and me, how we engage in this conversation. So what are these three opportunities? We will have first to sort of increase, revisit our understanding of emotional intelligence by examining its nature, challenges, and the key dimensions. We will also look at ways to enhance our emotional intelligence as leaders, as Vista leaders, and then also to look at what are some ways we can go about helping our team members, our Vista members, and our teams to build their own emotional intelligence as a team as well as individual members. So these are the three opportunities we have. With that, let's get started. So what I like to do in my webinars, to frame it looking at some primary questions. So we take one question at a time and then have a conversation around that. So there are six questions we are going to be looking at during this conversation. What are emotions? What is EQ, or the emotional intelligence? Why is it challenging? Why do people have to learn it? What are the workplace related benefits when there is high EQ demonstrated by people who work at that workplace? Then what are the key dimensions of emotional intelligence, and how can we focus on them and improve them? And our last question is, how can we support our members and our teams to build their own emotional intelligence? So these are the six questions our conversation will be framed around. So with that, let's kind of revisit the first, the basic question. What are emotions, right? We hear this all the time. So let's take a look at how emotions are being defined in psychology, in neuroscience, and in social science. Kind of look at the fundamentals of emotions. So as we know, these are some of the key emotions that we all can attest to, that we all have experienced in our lives. So I hope right now, as you are engaging in this conversation, that you have some of the happy emotions. So you can, engage happily and be productive in this conversation. All right, so as you can see, there are key ways scientists, psychologists kind of identify what emotions are. So one is that And emotion is the meaning, right? We all give to how we feel, our felt states of arousal that consider emotions to be, and also the psychologists consider emotions to be very complex states involving so many different aspects, right? That is why it is a very challenging and a complex competency, because it does involve so many different aspects to that. So on one hand, some psychologists believe that emotion is a physiological state of arousal, and then also we have another school of thought who focus on emotions, and what they say, it also involves an object and as having a certain significance to the individual, a value to the individual. So, going a little further, there are two major scientific approaches to analyzing or identifying emotions. So first is the cognitive appraisal theory that I think most of us are very familiar. That is about judgments about current situation in regard to meeting one's goals or expectations. I think that we all can very easily relate to that, because whenever one of our expectations or goals are not met the way we would like them to be met, then there are emotions. Even when they are met, there are emotions too, but they could be more positive emotions. So that's the cognitive way of defining emotions. The other one is the perceptions of changes in your body. And some scientists or some quarters believe the emotions actually first start arise from bodily reactions. And as you know, William James is one of the key authors, authority in this field many years ago. That's what his sort of the philosophy was around emotion. However, here's the greatest opportunity. As you can see, which I have taken from Psychology Today, Paul Taggart, who has written this book and many other books, talks about emotions that brain can perform emotions by interactively combining both these aspects of judgments and perceptions of bodily changes. So therefore, it is very important for us to understand the relationship between the prefrontal cortex, that's our brain element, and the key emotional center of the brain, which is the amygdala and insula. So we will kind of touch base on some of those things little bit as based on the relevancy, but this is just kind of looking at the basic, the scientific aspect to emotions. Then here's another great book by Paul Ekman, which is used in this field of emotional intelligence a lot. Why? Because in his work, he categorized all the different emotions under 6 key main categories. So as you can see, anger, happiness, disgust, surprise, sadness, and fear. So those are kind of the major emotional categories that the sub category sort of falls under. Now, let's kind of have a, make it more relevant to our own situation. So looking at, after we looked at this sort of the background, here's the question for you all. Do you think, as Mr. leaders, is it important to be aware of our own emotional triggers and associated emotions? If so, why? So let's use the chat function. So what I would like you to do, send your thoughts through the chat, but make sure you choose all participants in the send to window so everybody can see. So why do you think it is important for us as Vista leaders to be aware of our own emotional triggers and associated emotions? I'm not asking you what are those triggers, but I'm asking you, why do you think it's important? So let's get some thoughts through the chat function. So as I said at the beginning, let's make it a conversation. Thank you. So here we are seeing some, Rosalind is saying yes. If we are not aware of our emotional triggers, we may not realize we are not giving the most effective advice to our members when they are having challenges. Indeed, Rosalind, thank you. Because as a leader, right, we really need to know what hold us back or what get us to respond or react. If we are not centered, it is very hard to be able to guide, support somebody else. So that's very, very important as a leader. And yes, we are getting a few more thoughts here. Let's take a quick look at a couple of them. And Ted is, reminding us our communication takes place non-verbally. So it is very, very important what are the signals that we are sending. And you are right, Ted, because neuroscience also, brain science and neuroscience has demonstrated that before we say anything, our body has already communicated the true meaning of what we are trying to say, right? So that's very, very important. So our emotions will be sending those communication to the people. Even, so it's important for us to have hold of our emotions. And Helen is saying, yes, definitely, we want to work with people effectively, and also reminding. That's the beauty and the challenge, right? When you are a leader, whether we like it or not, people we lead always, observing us, sometimes judging us. So our actions, our speech, what we say, how we say, what we do, how we do things, always send signals to the people that we are working with. So we are 24-hour sort of a role model when we are, in a leadership role. So, and then being that self-awareness, and we will definitely talk more about this as we go, as Helen had pointed out, that's a huge aspect, right? And when Katia is saying, exactly, being aware of your own triggers, then you can distinguish, right, what is the actual issue to be addressed, or what are based on the personal, our own personal experiences. Exactly, because emotions, as we will look at, the emotional center in the brain, which is the amygdala, hold these memories. And the amygdala takes control over responding to situations, more than responding, reacting to situations based on our own personal memories, not necessarily being able to see for what it truly is at that moment happening outside of us. And also, Molly is pointing out, if we are aware of our emotions, we can more effectively manage them and maintain control over it. Indeed, that the control, having control over situations, knowing our triggers and knowing our emotions is indeed, it's not only a leadership trait, as we all know, it's a higher level human trait, right? Because, I mean, think about, just in day-to-day life, you come across people no matter what happens, you see how centered they are, right? How solid they are. They still have feelings, they have emotion, but they sort of engage, conduct themselves in such a way that, you know, there is so much centeredness that come across. We all, maybe some of you are like that. We all have had life experiences that we see those kind of individuals, and what goes in our mind, we are like, wow, this person is so centered, right? That is because of being able to manage and control emotions. It has become a habit for these individuals. Thank you, everyone. This is great. I really appreciate your participation, and I encourage you to keep it up. So let's take a quick look at 4 reflective questions, because as some of you indicated, you know, becoming self-aware of our own emotions and their impact is the key, right? So 4 reflective questions. If you have a piece of paper, I would even invite you to like do your own notes on this as we go through this quickly during this reflective exercise. So, first question, I want you to think about what is a specific emotion that arises in you when you feel an important value is compromised at work. As you can see in the example, if one of your values is working on time, when someone doesn't meet a deadline that you have set up mutually, you know, if that is my value, I could get very angry, frustrated, right? So likewise, I want you to think about one of your specific emotions that arises at the workplace when one of your own values is compromised. All right. So make a mental note or a actual note in your piece of paper. Then let's look at the next question. Then ask yourself, based on that, what you have thought or written earlier, what are my internal body responses when that emotion arises? Right? So for me, because you know, when somebody doesn't work on time, meet a deadline, when I find that, you know, I get my heartbeat, you know, escalated, right? And then it's very hard for me maybe to be able to be very focused in my communication with that individual at that point, because this emotion has taken over and created a cloud of frustration, anger maybe to a certain level between me and that person, so I cannot really now fully concentrate and focus, be centered, right? So that's example. So think about what is your, or what are your internal body responses when that emotion arises. Then the third question is, how do you react when that specific emotion arises within you? As you are looking at these 3 questions, don't go everywhere, just take one example, right? We are working on the same example, right? So in my case, let's say my facial expressions, I may not even know is communicating my frustration in a subtle way, or I may be like my behavior, because I am frustrated with this individual not meeting my value, and because of those emotions, I may be like sort of avoiding, you know, conversation, eye contact with this individual during that day, during that week, or whatever. So really ask you, be very honest to yourself. And sometimes these are, you know, happening at a subconscious level. So that's why it's very, very important for us to reflect, go deeper, and really ask ourselves. Okay, and then the 4th question is, Now, what are the consequences of my reactions to myself and others? So because of my behavior or actions based on my emotions, what does that mean to myself? What does that actually do to me and to other people? Right? So here, in this example I had given, how it can impact me, it creates stress, and I feel guilty for the way I had sort of reacted. After the fact, I'm thinking about it. After the, couple of days, or after that day, next day, I feel like, wow, I shouldn't have reacted that way. And then what's the impact to the others that I'm working with? It has taken a toll or a withdrawal from my relationship account with that individual, right? So hindering that rapport and taking it from that. So if anybody wants to quickly, like, give you 4 pieces in a very short form through the chat, so that will be, there'll be another example that will kind of get people to sort of see how it all this connects together. I will give you a minute. You can send those through the chat. If you are, willing to do that, you can say number 1, 2, 3, 4, and just put your answers to each number. So you don't have to write full sentences. You can just write number 1, what is the specific emotion? Number 2, your internal body response. Number 3, okay, here we go. Candy. I feel frustrated when someone is not patient with me or my peers. Thank you. So that's number 1, right? So that's the emotion that brings out for Candy. So what happens next? What sort of reactions do you have internally? So my HP axis is activated and feel my cortisol level rise. Yes, we all know how damaging that could be when the cortisol level rises in our system. Okay. So let's see, anybody, thank you, Candy. So Candy is building on the example of somebody not having patience. So the feeling is my jaws clench and I try to control my reactions. Thank you. This is great because you are really sort of connecting at a deeper level, not just saying, oh, when somebody is not patient with me, I get mad. But you are not stopping at that level. That's the starting point. But most people would only do that. But here what you're doing, you are getting deeper. You are going deeper, deeper, and trying to understand what are the things that brings up. So I have, yes, then Candy also saying for the third, I try to show even more patience with the person who is frustrating me. That's good. You are choosing a more positive approach. And then we have a couple of others who actually also sharing their thoughts. Rosalind is talking about the emotion is frustration, body heat rises. I take a step back from the trigger of the emotion and take a walk. So here you are being very good because in this case, rather than reacting, you are sort of responding. Once I walk away, I am able to come back with a better perspective of the situation. Great. But here you are, I mean, your example sounds like you are aware of what's going on, but also you have taken, try to take sort of control of it. And yes, Samantha, talking about the guilt, anger, or the disappointment in relation to some of the specific emotions, the heart rate increases, flushed face, and then you become silent, right? A lot of people choose to go that direction. And then, but also you are using that to really think about how could you do things better next time. And then I don't allow time to process current situation. I move on too quickly. I make things my problem. So that's, yes, some of us also have that tendency. These are great self-awareness leaders. I mean, thank you for sharing this because more self-aware, again, we will see that it's a huge piece of emotional intelligence. Better we will be with our own EQ competence. So, and one of the major tendencies many human beings have, that first we need to identify, recognize, then we need to work to, address it and taking it personally. And that does not, of course, help. We all know that, but it's good at least to be able to know that. Because if we are not willing to recognize and admit that, we will never overcome that. So thank you for those of you who shared your responses. But again, the leaders, there are many ways you can start working on your emotional intelligence. This is another way. This is a very basic, but very easy, practical way. Just taking, these 4 questions, taking yourself through these 4 questions, but when we do that, we have to be very specific, not think about you as your emotions in general, but very specifically in relation to your values, work values, for example, at workplace, or your relationship norms. Be specific and take your thinking through these 4 questions. That can unveil so much that we may not have really looked into before. And once we have that stuff, then we can work with that. But most of the time, emotional intelligence, the challenge is they are hidden. That's why we call it, reacting. Okay, so moving on. So let me again quickly check if a couple of you can let me know whether you can still hear me clearly, because I don't want to take it for granted. Technology, you never know whether I have already got disconnected. Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that feedback. Okay, here's so with what we looked at now, I'm a visual learner, so I try to, put things in sort of visual format, because generally speaking, about 80% of human beings take information through visual learning. So with that, as we saw, so there's emotion, there's a body response. Then, of course, as you can see, generally speaking, there's a reaction. Then, of course, there are those unintended consequences. That's the 4th question, based on a certain trigger. Now, what I would like you to do, think about, take a moment. What are some of your other emotional triggers at workplace? What are some other triggers that especially, I mean, yes, there are positive ones too, but here we are mainly talking about negative ones, because those are the ones that get us to react that we later regret. So what are some of those other emotional triggers at workplace? What could be some of the others? And you can just use the chat function, and I'm not going to read them. Just let everybody just, look at the chat responses, but we'll take a minute just to see some of what are those other triggers. Because the reason I'm asking you to share some of it, this will also help some of us who may not have necessarily either had the time or taken the time or been analytical enough to identify what those triggers are. So seeing some of the triggers might really remind me, oh, that definitely is one of the triggers that I have not thought about, but I know that I get upset. So yes, thank you, Roslyn, for starting it. responding. So everybody just look through the chat responses your colleagues are sharing and see whether there are certain ones that seems to be some of your triggers that you have not identified clearly before. This might give you some idea. So thank you. Let's take few more. Let's take about another few more seconds. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. This is great. Thank you. Okay, great. These are, again, thank you. These are great reminders. And actually, I can also see some of you are like, yes, you know, like you can connect with some of what's been said. So this is good. Just kind of pay attention and see whether there are things that you have not thought about before that you really need to identify about yourself. Thank you. So moving forward, our second question. Out of the 6 questions we are going to be looking at during this conversation. First question we looked at what are emotions. Now we are looking at what is emotional intelligence. So as you know, we all know emotional intelligence is not a new concept, right? It's not a new thought. It's not a new subject. It has been there throughout the history. For example, when we look at 1,000 years ago, philosophers from Socrates and Plato to Buddha and Confucius, all these different well-known individuals have advised regulating emotions and our ability, enhancing our ability to improve social interactions with, you know, more effectively. So it has always been there. Now, when it came to the academic world, some of the first initial work that was done, as you can see, by these 2 individuals, Peter Salovey, who was the president of Yale University at that point, and John Mayer, who is also a psychologist who has done a lot of work around these themes. And what they are saying, it is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and actions. So when they first sort of brought this theme in a more sort of academic framework, they were focusing on 3 key aspects. That's important. But they said first, it is very, very important for us to appraise an expression of emotion. And then the regulation. Then to be able to redirect our emotions in a constructive way. So that's kind of the sort of the beginning point. Again, it has been in the history, but in a more sort of the academic context. But then, you all know, some of you have looked into this subject matter, this took another, there was this tipping point about the emotional intelligence conversation in 1995 when Daniel Goleman, who is considered to be one of the top authors and psychologists, especially in emotional intelligence, who have written several books, this specific work, this book you are looking at, that he produced during that year, became the tipping point. Because he brought a lot to the table about emotional intelligence based on very extensive work that he did. And one of the things that really got people's attention when he came with this book and told the public, reminded us why emotional intelligence or the EQ matter more than IQ. That took kind of a U-turn in people's thinking about intelligence. Because as we know, generally, we all, like in the past, at workplace, at educational institutions, everywhere, whenever people talk about intelligence, they were more always giving importance to IQ, right? So if somebody has a high IQ, then they were considered to be the best performers. But it was actually, based on a lot of studies and research, it was proven not to be true. What in this work Daniel Goleman was able to demonstrate is that emotional intelligence actually matters more than the IQ. That doesn't mean that IQ is not needed, of course. However, IQ without emotional intelligence is not going to be productive. So some of the studies proved to him that the most effective leaders at a workplace, even at senior level, the most effective ones were actually the ones who had a higher emotional intelligence, EQ. Those who had a high IQ but had a less EQ were not effective. So that's why it kind of got everybody's attention. And all the workplaces, management, trainings started really paying attention and bringing this to forefront, and individuals working on it. So that is what sort of emotional intelligence. Our third question is, we all are human beings, so why not we all have a high level of EQ competency? But in the real fact, that is not the case, and we will see why. So why emotional intelligence is challenging? Before we look at that question, let's just ask ourselves, and I'm asking you all, have you had situations where after quickly reacting to something, later you are telling yourself, oh, I shouldn't have said it or done it. Wish I can take it back. How many of you have had that experience at least once in your life? You can just send through the chat. If it is true, you can just say yes. Okay, as you can see, there are several yeses popping up. And if I to answer that question myself, I will take about 20 minutes to write so many yeses through the chat, I'll tell you, because that's the case, right? We all know that. Almost all of us can relate to this. If there's any one of you who is going to say, no, I never ever had to think that way, that's amazing. That means you really operating at such a higher level of emotional intelligence, and that's, I mean, if I doubt, but I will, if somebody feels, then you need to rethink about, is that really true about you, because it will be very hard to find an individual who might be able to say that that person never had this thought. Okay, so I like that. I played the 50 years, right? Okay, thank you. So let's take a look at why this is emotional intelligence is challenging from a very scientific point of view, right? And some of you are familiar with this kind of work, so please bear with me, but for me it's important. When we look at emotional intelligence, we really need to understand our brain. Talking about emotional intelligence without how the brain works, I think is going to, it's not going to be helpful, right? So, as we know, the very basically, evolution of the brain, we know the first, there was only a brain stem, right? And then through million years of evolution, then developed the limbic system. And that is what we call the emotional brain. And then created the neocortex, which we all are operating from, now, but it took million years. Now, why is it important for us to understand this? Because many years ago, million years ago, individuals, in the ancient times, the individuals were able to survive because of the limbic system, because of the emotional brain. If they were not operating from that, based on science, human evolution would not have happened, right? So that's why when many years ago, as you read the history, that when an individual was faced with a huge animal that they don't have control over, they had only a couple of responses: freeze, fight, or flight, right? Those are the three. They had to operate from that. There was no neocortex, there was no rational thinking, because if there was rational thinking and if they were looking at the animal is thinking, oh, could this be a more friendlier one, that person would have been gone by within seconds, right? So at that level of evolution, individuals had to operate from that emotional level. However, then million years later, we also have another piece of the brain called the neocortex. So, understanding this rational thinking, how the cortex come into play today, is very important to understand emotional intelligence. For me personally, these next two slides, this one and the next one, was an eye-opener to understand what emotional intelligence is. So, and some of you are saying, I would love to have a copy of this PowerPoint. Yes, this will be, posted on the Vista campus. And I'm also recording this session too. Okay, so just you know that. All right, so as you can see, we take information through our sensors, right? So when we take information through our sensors, the signals first go within the brain to the thalamus. And then from the thalamus, it goes to the appropriate cortex, neocortex. In this case, the sensors is coming through the eye. So the person sees a snake, and that information from the thalamus go to the visual cortex. So when it goes to the cortex, where the rational thinking is taking place, as you can see, it look at what's been sent, the signal sent in, and then it rationally analyze it, and then it send a signal to the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain, and then the amygdala taking that rational signal response that the cortex send, actually react or respond. So amygdala send the signals for the necessary action. Now, this is the way the brain is expected to work, I would say, with the cortex coming into existence. However, given the brain evolution, as you can see, we do have a challenge because the cortex was not there before, right? Million years ago, it had only the amygdala. So when the brain was getting a signal through any one of these sensors, the signal go to thalamus, and then thalamus send it to amygdala. So the amygdala send the emotional response. That's why fight or flight response took place, because there was no cortex for rational thinking. Now, because we have the cortex for rational thinking, that does not mean we have disconnected that short circuit from the amygdala, from the thalamus to the amygdala. So this is what emotional intelligence is all about, right? So what's happening, while the signal is sent from the thalamus to the cortex, to the appropriate cortex, the visual or based on the sense, organ we use, while it is processed rationally and sent to the amygdala, thalamus has already sent a dirty signal through the short circuit. So the amygdala, before the rational thinking, has already reacted emotionally. This is exactly why that you have that thought, I should not have said that, I should not have done it, because what happens, the moment we react, forgetting about our rational response is taking little time to get to us, we react from the amygdala's emotional response, and when the rational response comes, then we say, oh, why did I say that? So that's where the opportunity lies, right? So as we go back, we have emotion, we have a body reaction because of a trigger. There is emotion, there is a body reaction. Then, if we can remind ourselves, no, I am not going to just listen to the amygdala and react. I am waiting for my rational thinking, and then we can think and respond, and our response, and because it came from rational thinking, is going to be more constructive. That's why some of your colleagues earlier said, when you have that emotion body reaction, I know my amygdala is going to react, so I walk away. I take a walk so I can think and respond and be constructive with my response, rather than going by the amygdala signal with a reaction and then having unintended consequences. This is in a sort of a scientific brain science manner, how the brain seems to be dealing with our emotional intelligence. So what we need to remember, and Viktor Frankl said it so beautifully, and this has been used by many of key authors in this subject matter and in management and leadership. You know, many books you read, you will always come across this quote, or sometimes they use the same quote as theirs, but this original came, as you can see, as Viktor says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. What is this space? This space is waiting, ignoring the amygdala's reactive, quick, dirty signal, using the space, having patience for the rational thinking to come in. Now, why amygdala has that short circuit? We said million years ago we needed that for survival. Even today, sometimes we use it. But it's not the same case as it used to be million years ago. Very rarely we will have to use that short circuit, because there are maybe in a situation that you cannot wait for your rational thinking, you just have to run away from that incident or situation in order for your own survival. Now that is amygdala response, it's an important response. So that short circuit still serves us, but it also has the tendency to take control over everything when it comes to emotions. So that is why it's very, very, very important for us to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's quickly look at what are some of your strategies to avoid that initial urge where you take the pause, the space between the stimulus and response. As I said earlier, one of our colleagues said, going for a walk when you are mad, right? Taking time before you respond. What are some of other techniques you use? Because some of these we might be able to utilize, adapt in our own lives. What are the things that you do in order not to react, but to respond rationally, constructively? What are some of the other ways? Let's get some thoughts through the chat. What are some of the techniques you have adapted in your own life okay, getting others' perspective before you respond, so it won't be a reaction. Yes, taking deep breaths. You know, breathing is always available to us, right? Accessible to us. This is why today the meditation, not from a spiritual point, but meditation as a human sort of a skill practice has become so popular. Why? Through meditation, whether it is focusing on one's own breath or other ways you meditate, what it does, one of the great outcomes is people are getting better at their attention. They are getting better with their emotional intelligence. This is why companies today spend millions every year sending their employees to meditation programs. Now we are seeing the great benefits by having that sort of practice. Okay, great, thank you. And very simple. Sometimes it just could be counting, right? What are we again saying? By counting, we are letting the rational signal to come through, giving it enough time so the rational signal will come, so we have not reacted before it has come to the amygdala. Thank you. Yeah, mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness again, basically what is mindfulness is our ability to be able to pay full attention to one thing at a given time, and not full attention, but also sustained attention, right? So there are many ways people frame this. Some say like living in the moment, right? So all that is about training our brain, because especially why it has become such a need today, because there are so many things in our possession today that is so distracting. The biggest culprit is the cell phone, right? And many other things at the workplace. So our mind has lost its ability to be able to maintain sustained focus. This is why people are reacting more at workplace, even at homes too, but at workplace, we are talking about being a leader. At workplace, because it is not a habit for us anymore, for most of us, to be able to have sustained attention on one thing at a given time. Thank you. Great. So these are, very simple. Anybody can adapt those, but they are great techniques. Thank you for those of you who are kind enough to share. So our next question, the fourth question, what are the workplace-related benefits of high emotional intelligence? As a leader, we need to kind of remind ourselves. So you can see there are many, many benefits. I'm highlighting here 6 major ones. When there is high emotional intelligence among the leaders at the workplace as well as the employees or the members, it contributes to increased team performance, increased personal well-being. We all know that. It decreases occupational stress. It reduces staff turnover. This is a huge problem, especially in the service sector, non-profit world. It leads to better decision making, and of course makes individuals better, effective, focused leaders. So I'm going to show you some examples. I'm not going to read them, but I will have it on the screen for a few seconds, each one. Just read those. And that will kind of tell you how emotional intelligence has changed the workplaces. Okay, here's another one. Just look at the increase, enhancement, outcome, output. Here's another one. And here's another one. And here's the last example on that. Okay, so these are real life stories, right? This is exactly what's happening when there is focus on high emotional intelligence. Okay, so now let's go to our fifth question. What are the key dimensions of emotional intelligence and how can we enhance them? So now this takes us back to Daniel Goleman's work. So Daniel Goleman, as we said in this 1995 emotional intelligence book, brought these 5 dimensions to the table. And he helped us to understand emotional intelligence in a much more, in a way, it's in a simpler way, because his framework allowed us to look at emotional intelligence, which is a very complex concept, but in a more sort of a methodical, manageable way. So his framework has these 5 pieces, most of you are aware, and first one is self-awareness, right? So self-awareness, and as some of you said many, earlier in our examples, about one's self-confidence. And that, what does that mean? Self-confidence comes, some of it comes from knowing one's own strengths. Also knowing one's own limitations, right? So being very self-aware, it creates self-confidence. And also, interestingly, another one of self-confidence is, attribute is knowing when to ask for help and being able to ask for help. Because people who are asking for help when they need help, actually it's a demonstration of high self-confidence. Because they are internally self-confident, that's why they can ask, because they are very aware of themselves, self-aware. They know what they know and they also know what they don't know. Okay? Then they also utilize their strengths. So that's the self-confidence. Realistic self-assessment. And these are the individuals who have a tendency or the habit of, they neither become too critical, or they don't become unrealistically hopeful. So they operate at a very realistic level. Again, because it's part of the self-awareness. And these are the people also, realistic self-assessment element in relation to self-awareness is also the people who can be very honest with themselves as well as with other people. And they also feel very confident, comfortable talking about their strengths and limitations. And they are also the individuals, realistic self-assessment, they seek for feedback. They they ask for feedback because they really connected to themselves. They know the areas, there are areas for improvement. They want to recognize their strengths as well. So they solicit feedback. Then when it comes to self-deprecating sense of humor, and that is, we all know, our ability to laugh at our own mistakes, embrace our mistakes, look at them with a smile, and learn from it. So that's a very, very important aspect of self-awareness. Okay, the second element, Daniel Goleman talks about is self-regulation, right? So self-regulation also has three components, subcomponents, trustworthiness and integrity. That is consistency. Especially as a leader, you know how important that is, right? When we are not consistent, we lose it. We lose our reputation. It takes a toll on our reputation, trust with the people that we lead. So they are consistent. They are never driven by moods or impulsive urges. They are always driven by values, principles, right? And they also create, as leaders, they create reasonable environment, trustworthy environment, and also they play to be fair. No favoritism, right? So everybody feels that they are being treated fairly, and then these are the individuals who work with integrity, are the individuals who always try to avoid, or not more than, it's not avoiding, it's actually preventing politics, infighting among teams. They take all the measures for those things not to happen. Then comfort with ambiguity. Very, very important. All these are important. What does that mean? When there is change, they don't get emotional about. When there is change with policies, workplace procedures, or staff or relationships, leadership, they don't panic, right? They embrace them as opportunities. And then they also have the ability to suspend judgment and always seek for more information. So they are not, again, jumping into conclusions, but looking for all the information to be better informed. And they can roll with challenges, changes easily. And that is the change element, openness to change. Third one, motivation. Again, there are three sub-aspects. This is about leaders wanting to achieve beyond expectations. They are as everyone else is. So these leaders, when it comes to motivation, have a ability or thirst to pursue goals with energy and persistence. And that again comes with these sort of the three sub attributes. So they are doing strong desire to achieve. What does that mean? Part of it is you do things not for the sake of doing something, but you do it because that there is a value, there is a meaningful purpose. They are not doing it because it is money driven or recognition driven, because it's purpose driven, right? So that's their drive. And they are very passionate about what they are working for. And they look out for like challenges, they look out for creative opportunities. And challenge in their eyes, they see it as an opportunity. And then the optimism, they are so interconnected. Even in the face of failure, right? They still, even if something was not successful, they still have the ability to look at what was still, what can we learn from that, as well as what are some of the things that we did right. Still you take pride in your work because you have given your best shot, you have driven by values. So even if it is failure, you can take pride. You stood for the right values and right purpose. And ability to overcome frustration, setback, or failure. Today, they talk so much about this called resilience, right? That's what, ability to bounce back. Then the organizational commitment, that they are committed to the organizational values, not just verbally, but their actions, their behavior is demonstrating their true commitment, the true commitment to the vision and the goals of an organization. Because of that, these are some of the stuff, you know, in some organizations you have seen, they are so effective. And there are other organizations who would like to hire them, even for better, benefits. But sometimes I come across some of these individuals, even in whether it's in the government sector, private sector, doesn't matter. They don't leave because it's not the money. They are so committed to the organization because they love what the organization is doing. So their life purpose is connected to the organizational mission or the purpose. So that's the motivation element. Then the fourth element, as Daniel Goleman points out, is the empathy, right? So empathy is the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and treat them accordingly. So it's very important, right, as a leader to be able to do that. So what does that mean? There are again three sub-elements. It's about expertise in building and retaining talents. And today we see because a lot of leaders lose great talents because they cannot retain them because lack of empathy. It is about ability to sense and understand the viewpoints of everyone else around the table. It's not looking at things my way is the highway, right? This is everybody working together. Everybody's idea is helpful. Everybody's understanding where everybody comes from. Not necessarily always agreeing, but to be able to understand. Being in somebody else's shoes. Then cross-cultural sensitivity, we know, right? That's another huge element. Ability to recognize, celebrate, utilize diversity aspects of team members. You know, sometimes leaders are good about recognizing, but not necessarily utilizing. So it's very, very important. Also, understand, recognize the cultural makeup of the team. And as some of our colleagues earlier pointed out, they are also the people who can see beyond what's at the superficial level. They can see beyond what is being said. They see what is not being said. Then the service to client and customers. That element is about servant leadership attitude and using that servant leadership approach. So that's the empathy. And the fifth one out of his 5 elements, the social skills, right? So today we have something called social intelligence as one of the intelligences. Howard Gardner, I think, who brought up 9 intelligences framework. Social intelligence is basically the social skills here. That is our ability to manage relationships with others and to be able to build networks. So 3 components to that as well: effectiveness in leading change. So being able to embrace change and being a role model. And also one's ability as a leader to rally people around a purpose and a mission. Then the second one is the ability, the friendliness with purpose. So you are working with people at a human level, but also there is accountability that kicks in. And there are times you have to be rational. You do recognize emotions, but just because you recognize emotions, you are not minimizing or compromising the goals or the mission or the values of the purpose, right? So being able to do that. And the third is to be able to find common grounds with people of all different types, kinds, personalities. How can you bring everybody together? Because no matter how different people would be at a workplace in relation to any dimension, whether it is work style or whatever, there are still things we all are connected. We share commonly as human beings. And then always as a leader reminding ourselves and also sending the message that nothing important can get done by oneself. If there is something important happen, it gets done by a team, which means every achievement is our achievement, not my achievement as a leader, right? So these are the 5 components that really brought a change in the management, human management, people management, in leadership with Daniel's work in 1995. So once again, those are the 5: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Then another piece I would like to introduce, and you can do some research on this. This is great work by Richard Davidson. He's a neuroscientist and done great work about meditation, attention, emotional intelligence. He's a great author to, explore, examine the work. So he brought this concept called the emotional style, which is a very, very fascinating concept. And what he says, emotional style, as you can see, is a consistent way of responding to our lives, which is governed by specific identifiable brain circuits, right? We looked at those. Emotional styles influences the likelihood of feeling a particular emotional states, traits, and moods. They are fundamental building blocks. And in his work, he's talking about 6 emotional style dimensions. And again, you see there are books written about some of these, right? Resilience, I mean, you hear a lot of webinars around resilience. There are books written, but this is also coming as part of the emotional attribute. So in the 6th, when he talks about, as you can see, resilience is our ability to bounce back. Outlook. How effective are we maintaining our positive emotion? Because that's, a lot of people can get into a positive emotion, but then it fades away. But how can we sustain as leaders? Social intuition. And this is what the social skills, right? How effective are we picking up signals from people around you without us letting know? When I walk into my team meeting, I look around, I should be able to kind of detect the emotion of the team as a whole, as well as looking at every individual to some level. I should be able to detect how each person is feeling at that point, at least what we are going to be talking about. So I can only do that if I know my people, if they are human beings to me, not just a position description, not a WAD, but they are humans, right? Self-awareness, we talked a lot about that. Sensitivity to the context. Okay, so how effectively can we deal with a situation and take the context into consideration? This is about our flexibility. Tolerance for ambiguity, as we saw some of the sub-aspects of Daniel's work. And then attention, how sharp and clear your focus is. I have read a book by him about attention. It's a great book. He's done a lot of work around meditation and especially in attention. So that's one of the other good work out there, the emotional style and the 6 dimensions. And the last question we are going to look at, so based on what we have been looking at, how can we support and our members and the team build the emotional intelligence? So at an individual level, first of all, awareness of emotions. So we should be able to connect with our individuals at a level, not at a superficial level, at a human level that we cannot recognize what's going on, what's happening. So how do we do? First, human connection. As I said, I need to know my members, not as a project, not as a WAD, but as a human being, right? Individual check-in, very, very important. A role model. When I model to my members individually, how I feel. If I feel like, I'm frustrated, it's okay for me to tell the person, I feel a little frustrated about what's happening right now with our project process. But by saying that, we have to be careful. We don't say that to become part of the problem. We say that it is okay to recognize your feelings. Because if you are not identifying your feelings, then you cannot be constructive. Right? So it's been a role model that way. It's okay. So then when I do that, they also become comfortable expressing. They will say, to be very honest, I really feel not happy with this situation or this way of doing business. Great. I need to know that. Then that doesn't mean that person, we are going to hold that person also you don't want to do anything. No, that's not the case. Thank you. It's good for us to, put our feelings out. Now let's see why it is making us such way. How can we address that, right? Demonstrate positive attitude. So that is about, always coming across to my individual members when I come across being part of the solution, no matter what challenges out there, I'm inviting to them on the same boat. Join me. Let's be part of the solution. But if I have a negative attitude as a leader with my individual members, then I'm calling them to become part of the problem. And that is a lose situation for everybody, lose-lose situation. Then solicit each person's view, right? Individually get everybody's ideas as a leader. So that is the awareness of emotions. Then the other one is regulating emotions. So establishing and using norms, working with individuals. Whenever there is behavior to be addressed, as a leader, at an individual level, I address those with them. Because it's very important for us to treat them at the early stage. Validation of contributions. When my individual members, at an individual level, validating, respect their individuality, right? Constructive handling of confrontations. With my members, as a leader, I may have times that there are times we are not going to agree, the person and myself. But how do you go about addressing that in a constructive way? And then being very genuine and not fake, but being truly caring, right? Then from a group level, as a team, then doing also similarly, awareness of emotions. I need as a leader to take pulse checks time to time as a team. In my team meetings, I say, hey folks, let's do a pulse check, emotions pulse check. Whatever, there are creative ways you can do that. You can ask everybody as a team, you can ask them to draw a face that represents the current team's emotions about what's going on. And then you can ask them to describe why did they draw that smiling face or, sad face or angry face or whatever. So you really, do pulse checks. Recognizing everybody's attributes they bring to the table. And also understanding everybody's EQ level, right? Who has more control of emotions and who may have less control. And that is not to minimize somebody just because they are not, they don't have a high level of EQ, but to recognize it and to be able to support, guide for them to overcome that. Again, acknowledging and discussing group moods, right? Inviting process checks. Again, checking, not taking things for granted. Even if things are going well, it's always important for us to do a process check because we are working with humans. More we pay attention to them as humans, they will be with us. And then regulating emotions as a team, putting systems together that create mechanisms for a team to recognize their emotions and then address them. Cultivating an affirmative environment, right? So inclusive, everybody can contribute. It's a positive. It's our space. Everybody feels this is my and our space. And encourage proactive problem solving. So these are ways you can sort of guide, help your members individually as well as a team. Okay. So next, the last question, sort of open question, and then after that, I would like you to kindly do a survey before you leave. Anything else that you do? Or any questions? Any other techniques that you use to enhance your individual members' EQ? Yes, sure. Yeah, I will go back to that. I will leave it on while we are asking that question. And also, Sam, this I will have it on the Vista Leader website when I post it. This slide, I'll make sure that is included too. So again, so these are some ways, as you know, emotional intelligence is a very complex, but if we really, as we saw, if we can take hold of some of these key elements, it's not that hard to work on it. And it is a process. You know, this is as many other skills, competencies, it is something we cannot go to a college and take an emotional intelligence course and after that, having 3 credit hours, I cannot claim I am emotionally, fully emotionally intelligent. No, that doesn't work like that, right? Because it's a life skill. So every time when we focus on it, we keep working on it. So these are the 6 questions we were looking at today. I know some of you may want to leave soon, but I would very much appreciate if you can kindly take a moment to do the survey. But again, I want to, before that, show you some, again, relevant resources. There are many books out there, but these are 3 books I would recommend if you want to do further reading. And again, Richard Davidson's work is great. This is one of his books, The Emotional Life of Your Brain. Daniel Goleman, as we know, excellent, who has done great things for the emotional intelligence discipline. And then also there's this emotional intelligence 2.0. So with that, I'm going to open the poll, and if you could kindly respond to it, I would very much appreciate. And some of you, great, and Trevor is saying Richard Davidson's book is amazing, good. So that's good. You are also recommending that, highlighting the importance. So I would very much appreciate if you could kindly do the survey before you leave. With that, thank you so very much for joining us today. This Friday, I know Friday is the time you want to go home. But thank you, because this is a very, very important thing. And thank you so very much for your great sharing, being so generous with your insights and experiences. And then to each one of you, as a Vista leader, you may not be getting this every day, but just know, we know how hard and effectively you work to make your members this year of service a fulfilling life experience. So we recognize that, and we want to say thank you. Thank you so much for creating such a great, meaningful work-life experience for your members, what you do every day as a leader. And no matter what the challenges are, never get frustrated, give up, because you are having an impact on this individual's life. Okay, so thank you, leaders. I'm going to keep the poll going, but I will get off the phone, but the WebEx will be on. So if you could kindly complete it before you leave. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.